I'm going to kind of show you a lot of different things that I've done. And this was a house that some people came who were teaching at Princeton, and they came in. Wait, another thing I want you. Can we change a few of these lights? Can we take a few lights down so that the screens can be seen a little bit? Is that possible? So some people came to me, and they said they had what's equivalent to 15,000 Brazilian dollars to spend. Not very much, even in those times. But could I do a house for them on the beach in Fire Island? And I said, sure. I didn't know what I was talking about because I was very young. But we actually built this house on the beach in 9 days for $9,000. And it was published in a newspaper, the New York Times, and my parents were very proud. And they figured if I could do a house for $9,000, I could do a house for them, which I did, which cost a little bit more than that in New Jersey. But they said, we love what you do, but we want to live on one floor. Everything has to be on one level, which this is. And I'd gone to visit Frank Lloyd Wright's building at Falling Water, and I read everything that Wright said, and I believed in the extension of space from interior to exterior. So the interior space flowed out into the landscape. And then I got a little bit more work, and I had this office on 53rd Street, which looked out onto the garden of Lever House and got light, and we all sat around one table and worked with our T-squares. And as things progressed, I got a little bit more work, and we moved to a space on 57th Street. So you can see going from one office to another was quite a big change. And here, too, we sort of all sat in the same space as we do at the current time on 10th Avenue on the west side of New York City. But we still have all these drafting boards. Hopefully, one or two people draw, the rest are on computers, as I'm sure all of you are. But you can see we still had the T-squares at that time. And we had lots and lots of models all over the place, so we opened a space in Long Island City where we show the models. Some people came to me who had bought a house, a site in Connecticut, and they had, and I won't go through the diagrams, but it's very simply organized in terms of the site and the diagonal implications across the site and the primary view, which is out to the water, as you can see here. And it was very rocky, so we built the house vertically on 3 levels, with dining on the lowest level, living on the middle level, and the bedrooms on the closed side, and all the living spaces open to one another with views out to the water. And this is the entry side, the closed side, the bedroom side, and then you come in and you get this panoramic view to the Long Island Sound. Well, one house leads to another, and some people asked me to do a house for them in Michigan. They had seen this house on Long Island, and they said, oh, we want a house, you know, that faces the water. We have a great site. The site is very steeply sloping, as you can see. It slopes very, very precipitously. So you enter on the roof, and you come onto the roof, and you get a view out to Lake Michigan. And then as you move down into the living room, you look out to the water, and there's a stair that then takes you out to the beach. It has a small deck, and this photograph was taken shortly after it was completed some 25 years ago, and now the trees, of course, have grown up around it. But there it sits as if it's dropped by a helicopter right in the middle of the woods. I've done a few houses over time, and when I start looking back at the slides, I realize how many of them have been on the water. This is in Malibu in Los Angeles, and again, it's closed down solid on the street side, and you enter through a wall into a courtyard, and then into the living space, the major living space, and then out onto the pool deck, which opens to the Pacific Ocean. Well, one house that recently completed is this one in New Jersey for a couple who have a very fine folk art collection. And they wanted a house which could be, where their folk art could be displayed. And I sent a photographer one day up to photograph it, and it was a terrible foggy day. I said, don't go today, we want to photograph in the sun. And he took this photograph in this cloudy day, which I couldn't imagine having a nicer photograph of the house. And here you can see how you step out from the living space, which looks out to the meadow, to the back. A person in Texas who recently got married asked me to do a house in Dallas. So this is sort of Texas scale, a little bit larger than most houses one would imagine. And you enter into a courtyard, and you can see it's a 3-story house with a living level on the middle level, and you enter through the shield, through the front door, into a gallery space. He was collecting a great deal of art, and he wanted the house to display his art collection. So he got married. He married a woman with a small child, and he said, no, I don't think I want to live in this house with a child. I'll live next door. So he bought a house next door, and he now goes to the house during the day, and that's where he works, and then he goes home to his family next door at night, and he's given the house to the Dallas Museum of Art. So the collection and the house now belong to the museum, and it's open for all kinds of events, and it's become a public place. You never think of a house as being a public, part of a public institution, but this works very well for special events where people can come, walk around the grounds, see the art collection, and enjoy a day or an evening. Some people from Germany asked me to do a house in Naples, Florida, in what they called a gated community. And so when they told me that, I said, gated community, that sounds like trouble. Do they have any regulations? And they said, no, I told them you were going to be the architect. They're delighted. You can do whatever you want. And I said, well, maybe you better send me the regulations on what you can do and what you can't do there. And they did. And I noticed that it said in the regulations that the roof had to have a slope of 1 to 12. And I said, you know, I don't think I'm the right architect. I don't know how to do a house with a sloped roof. I just don't think I could do that. And they said, oh, don't worry, you could do what you want, and you know, they'll approve it. So I thought about it for a while, and I worked on the design and tried to come up with something that met the regulations with this sloped roof of 1 in 12, and took it down to the building department, and I said, well, here's the design. The roof has a slope, 1 in 12. And they said, no, no, you don't know what we mean. That's not what we mean. We mean it should go like that. And I said, but that's not what the regulation said. So they had no reason not to accept the sloped roof of the pitch that they had. Of course, right afterwards, they changed the regulations so that now all the roofs are like that. But it too is on the water and looks out to the harbor, and boats go by, and it's part of the scenic tour of Naples. Another small house is also in Malibu, closed down on the Pacific Coast Highway, where you enter into a courtyard before the house and then into the house, and from the living space it opens up to the Pacific Ocean. This too has a large 2-story living room, and it's actually quite narrow lot, so we have a wall that encloses the garden, and the views are out, as I said, to the water. Now, one of the things which we've done over the years, like most architects, is take part in competitions. And this was a competition which we did for 2 large office buildings and a small office building behind on the site where Madison Square Garden exists, and the garden was supposed to move to the water, and this site would become available for development. Unfortunately, the developer at that time saw that there wasn't really a viable market for 4.5 million square feet of office space, and unfortunately, the buildings were never built. But I look at it and I say, well, this is one way of building in Manhattan where it's not a singular building, but it's a group of buildings that create a place. And that's very important in all of our work, is the kind of environment that you create by what you do there. This was a renovation of a building downtown called Westbeth Artist Housing, which is housing for artists, and the buildings were renovated into lofts where the artists could then do what they wanted. And that's 3 blocks north of these 2 buildings on Perry Street, 2 apartment buildings on Perry Street, which are just on the water, on the Hudson River. And somewhat later, they were so successful that a developer bought the site where you see this brick building on your right, and the 2 Perry Street buildings, which again are very open and almost loft-like, then became joined by, and they all have balconies looking out to the Hudson River, but they were joined by a 3rd building. And having 3 buildings in one place makes me very, very proud, because it really creates a place. It's almost like a gateway from Greenwich Village to the Hudson River Park, which has been developed all along the waterfront. And from each apartment, you can step out onto a balcony and look out to the river. As you can see, there was a time span between the first 2 buildings and the 3rd building, and so the articulation of the facade is somewhat different, although the scale is similar. We took part in a design for the World Trade Center. And when I say we, I mean Charles Gwathmey, Peter Eisman, Stephen Hall, and myself. And we felt that what was important there was not to create a building or a group of buildings, but to create a very special memorial square, a place where the buildings kind of enclose an outdoor space and are linked. And whether they're office buildings or residential buildings, they all become one. And as 2 buildings, creating a kind of iconic environment there, both during the day and at night, they would be seen from all over New York City and create a space that reaches out and is part of the waterfront. We were also involved in developing a site just south of the United Nations, here on the East River, with 5 residential buildings just south of the United Nations. Unfortunately, although the site is vacant, it doesn't seem that anything will occur there for many, many years. But here, a riverfront esplanade links the buildings to one another, to a cafe, and again, views of the waterfront. Again, on the water in Paris is an office building for a company called Canal Plus. It's an office building and studio building, and the glass area are office spaces. It opens out to a park and has views to Paris in all directions. You come into the top lit lobby, and then you go up to various office floors where there's a screening room, and then on to the rooftop terrace, which is off the cafeteria, or stepping out from your office, you get views of Paris in all directions. And we have in the past had quite a bit of work in Europe, not in South America, but in Europe. And here is a small building for a shipping company right on the lake, looking out to the water, where they would sort of keep track of all their boats, which are shipping things around the world. And you come into the lobby and up into the office space. The offices are very open, very transparent, with views out. And then again, onto the rooftop terrace. It's like being on a boat, only it doesn't move. But we wanted this feeling of being on the water for the company here. As I mentioned, we have done a number of competitions, and this is one in Frankfurt where we won a competition, which is actually an addition to the building to the left called the Villa Metzler. And we've taken the proportions of that villa, both in terms of its height, its windows size, and the floor plan, and really replicated that so that the villa is 1/4 of the museum, which wraps around it and connects to it. And one of the requirements was that the new museum be part of the villa, but touch it in the least, in the softest manner that wouldn't destroy the villa. And so the glass link corridor simply comes to one of the windows, which is now a door to the villa, and it opens out to a park. And in that park, on the ground level, is a sort of restaurant cafe, which has absolutely wonderful desserts. And so it became a place where, and I don't know how this happened, but it became a place where all expectant mothers would come and meet and have tea at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then after they gave birth to their child, they would wheel them there and talk with the other mothers about, isn't it nice, to be a mother and have a baby? And that continues to this day. So places take a life of their own, which you can't anticipate as an architect. You can't even design. It just happens. And when it does happen in ways like this, it really makes you feel good that the place is inhabited in ways that you can't plan, but which really gives it a uniqueness and a life in terms of the city. And that's also true here in Atlanta at the High Museum, which was done about the same time as the museum in Frankfurt. And you come up a ramp into a kind of entry area, and from there, from the entry, into an atrium. And the atrium space has really become a kind of social center for the city of Atlanta. If they want to have a graduation dance, or they want to have a marriage reception, or they want to just have a party, they use the atrium space, and people come to the museum. Sometimes they see an exhibit, and sometimes they just go and mingle with their friends. The collection is fairly eclectic, but the place has a unique life and an importance in the life of the city of Atlanta. This is another small museum for a man in Germany in a town called Schwendi, and he makes burners, oil heating units, and half of the town, if not all the town, sort of works in this factory. So he wanted to have a gallery for the workers at the factory, and a place where they would also have lunch, since everyone came there and worked the whole day. The curved building you see here is the lunchroom, and attached to it is the gallery space, and in between is a courtyard. So after lunch, when people have time, they can go and see a part of his collection. They can see the history of the manufacturing plant where they work, and then they can go back to work. I got a letter from the mayor of Ulm inviting us to do a competition in Ulm, in Germany. And I noticed one of the other people who were invited was a friend of mine who's an architect in Austria, named Hans Hollein. And so I called Hans and I said, well, I see we're invited to do this competition in Ulm. And Hans said to me, Richard, why would you ever think of doing a competition in Ulm? They've had 12 competitions in 100 years and nothing was built. So Hans didn't do the competition and we won. And this is the Stadthaus, as you can see in plan. It's right on the square in front of the tallest Gothic cathedral in Germany. And at the time we started, the square was a parking lot. And so not only did we do the small exhibition building, but we cleared out the parking lot to make it a major public plaza in the center of the city. And I think that not only do I love the building, which looks out, as you can see, through the skylights to the cathedral, but creating this public space is probably even more important than the creation of the building. And here in Barcelona, I walked the city with the mayor looking for a site for a new museum of contemporary art. And we walked in different places and together decided the best place for the new museum, it's in the most rundown area of the city, off the Ramblas, because the museum would help invigorate this really terrible area where no one would even dare to walk. And so the new museum, which is for contemporary art, is situated right in the heart of this old, what was then, dilapidated area. Now the buildings have been renovated, the shops have opened, there are great restaurants all around, and the city has changed as a result of all of the people who come and walk up the ramp and see changing exhibitions at the Barcelona Museum. This is a museum without a collection, so all the exhibitions really generate from somewhere else and they travel here and they're shown. And I did one small gallery which I thought was perfect for sculpture because it had this sort of free-form space, and the opening exhibition they hung paintings. So you can never imagine in a museum totally how the spaces are used, but they always find a way to use them uniquely. Well, the last thing I want to show you is the Getty Center in Los Angeles. And how many people have visited Los Angeles? Any? Well, I wish you all the rest to come here and spend a day at the Getty. I know you'll enjoy it because the Getty is not just a museum, it's really a unique destination in the city where you can come. It's a group of 7 interconnected buildings, the museum being the public destination, one of the great art libraries in the world. There's a conservation institute and office administrative spaces, as well as a restaurant and cafeteria. And you come to the bottom of the hill where you leave your car or where you get off the bus, and from the bottom of the hill you take a tram. And the tram takes you 5 minutes kind of meandering up to the hillside where you stop and there's a point of arrival. And then from the arrival plaza, you look around and decide where it is you want to go first. But the museum is really the public destination, and so from the arrival plaza, the stairs take you up to the front door of the museum. And you can look back and see some of the other buildings, or you go in. And the great thing about building in Los Angeles is the climate. So you go into the lobby, which you see here, and then out into the courtyard. And this whole experience of going inside and outside is really part of the museum experience. So you can go from garden to gallery and then back into the gallery, or you can stay within the galleries, as you see here, in connected space and go from one part of the collection to another. And each part of the collection is different, and then you can step out onto a promenade or go back into the garden and see the fountains, go to the auditorium, which you see here, and which opens out and down to further gardens. And the whole experience of being there is to be both within the buildings, but also in the landscape, viewing Los Angeles from various perspectives. This is a view of the Center for the History of Art and Humanities with great library, which is mostly underground. One of the restrictions was that the buildings could be no more than 3 stories high. So we built 3 stories up and 3 stories down. And so here at the center, light gets into the lower levels through skylights, and so we get natural light in areas which are part of the library but below ground. And then you step out and under covered passageways can go from one space to another or out onto the cafeteria where you can eat outside during the day and during the night. So I thought that was last, but it's not. This is a small museum, again an addition called the Berta Museum, a private collection which Mr. Berta paid for the building and gave it to the city of Baden-Baden. And so it's an addition to an existing neoclassical museum, but it stands on its own, and you come in to the lobby space, and again, ramps take you from one level to another, from one gallery to another. You look out to the city, and you look into the collection. And his collection is ever-changing, and he has extraordinary exhibitions, but of rather very modest scale, so that here you can see contemporary art, the de Kooning sculpture, the still painting, and the scale is one in which natural light, which illuminates all of the gallery spaces, illuminates the wonderful collection here, the Richters, and it's part of the town. And people come to Baden-Baden, you know, to see this small museum, and then it's part of the life of the town and enriches the life of this small town. And this is a museum in Rome. It's a museum of the Arapaci, and it's right on the Lungo Tevere. And so the wall, which you see on your left, really separates the plaza space from the road which runs by it. And it's also a kind of traffic island in that there's another small road on the east side as well. But now they're going to close the Lungo Tevere and put the road underground so that the building will in fact sit on a park that then opens out to the Tiber River. And I thought, well, this is Rome. You know, every place has a fountain in Rome, so we have to have a fountain where people can sit around and put their feet in the water at the end of the access to the entry. And when you come in, you see the monument, 7th century AD monument, one of the most important monuments in Rome, which actually Mussolini had moved to this site because he wanted it next to the mausoleum where he hoped to be buried. And so when I heard it was moved here by Mussolini, I said, well, why don't we just move it back to where it was? And they said, no, that's not possible. It's much too fragile. We have to build around it. So the entire building has been built around the existing monument, which was protected and then unveiled once the building was completed. And here, again, in keeping with Rome, I felt the use of travertine was important because travertine is everywhere, although we cut it in a different way than had been cut before. And in The Hague, we designed a library which is top lit and is really the center of lots of activities. If you come to The Hague, again, you need some assistance of any sort, you come to the City Hall, which opens up to a plaza, and its plaza space is covered. It's glazed over, and all the workers then are working on both sides of the atrium, and has a council chamber within. 2 courthouse buildings, one in Islip, Long Island, which you see here, which looks out onto the Long Island Sound, and you come into a dome space, a public space, which then opens into an atrium, and all the courtyards are on one side or the other of the atrium space. And as you wait to go into the courtrooms, you can stand and look out to the views to the water. And all of the courtrooms then on the upper levels get natural light, and it is very heavily used. And one thing leads to another. We asked to do another courthouse in Phoenix, Arizona, which you see here. And because of the heat, we couldn't have an outdoor plaza space, so we have an interior plaza space, which is cooled by misting air, which comes from the bottom of the glazed atrium and then is exhausted through the roof, and in that way can cool down the space so that when it's 110 degrees in Phoenix, it can be 85 degrees and feel cool inside the atrium. And here too, the courtyards, courtroom spaces are all lit, and this is a city hall in San Jose, California, where the mayor said, we want a dome. I said, what do you mean we want a dome? He said, well, all courthouses have domes, so we gave him a dome, which is really a public space where people come, and again, events take place, but it's really the entry space into the city hall. And these residential buildings hopefully will get built one day in California, as well as these houses, which are hopefully under construction in China on a hillside, which are for exhibition to show people what to aspire to in China. If they do well, they get to own a house like this. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but we'll see. And they're located on a hillside site overlooking the water. And in Germany, another small museum on the hillside above a railroad station, where you enter into the railroad station, under a tunnel, through the tunnel, up an elevator, across a bridge, and then finally into the museum. And from there, you get in the museum space, you look out to the Rhine River. And this is for ARP and Sophie Tauber ARP sculpture and paintings, and it's just recently completed, as is this building, which is under construction in Tel Aviv, of condominiums looking out to the city around it, where there are 2 or 4 units per floor, and finally a church which is built in Rome. Again, the result of a competition. And when I took the model, I got a phone call from the Vatican saying, would I like to present the design of the church to the Pope? And I said, of course, you don't have to ask, it'd be an honor. So we arranged a date in October, and I went to Rome with the model and had it set up in a room outside of where the Pope has his Wednesday morning blessings. And when I got there, the room was very dark, and I asked the Swiss guards, can we get some light in here so when the Pope comes in, he could see the model? And they disappeared, and I saw the time was going by, and I said, some luce, some light, please. And 5 minutes to 11 came, and the Swiss guards came, and they took the model, and they took it from where it was in the corner, and they brought it to the door of the room. And I said, I've been here for 3 hours. Why are you doing this? And they said, so the Pope doesn't have to walk so far. And I said, well, that makes sense, but where are the lights? And just then, the Pope appears, and the television cameras appear, and there was light. So you just have to have faith. So this is, as I mentioned, not in Rome. It's really 20 minutes from the center. It's not so difficult to get to, but it's a church which is filled with light, and the light comes in from above in various ways, and when you're in there, you look up, and you think about the sky and about things outside of yourself, and you feel that how important light is to our life. So thank you very much.